Hello, this is Simon Littlewood with Riabu Video, coming to you from Singapore. And I'm very pleased to have with me in the studio today Mr. Anshuman Das, who is the Chief Executive Officer of CareerNet and has come all the way from Bengaluru to see us.
Yep.
Very nice to see you, Anshuman.
Thank you, Simon. Pleasure meeting you.
And we've been having a very interesting conversation this morning about some of the challenges associated with working in India. But perhaps first of all, for some of our audience who don't necessarily know about CareerNet, you've described CareerNet to me as one of the leading recruitment agencies in India. Can you say a little bit more about CareerNet?
Sure. So CareerNet has been in the recruitment business for the last 20 years, and we cut across various sectors in India, right from IT to software to manufacturing. We are based in about 6 cities in the country. We have about 1,500 recruiters which work for us. We do roughly about close to 7,000 to 8,000 hires every month, which translates to roughly about 100,000 jobs every year. We typically work with about 700 to 800 customers, and our customers can range anywhere from a large conglomerate to a US multinational to a global multinational to a Indian startups and the whole internet ecosystem. So, and we provide services ranging in from top level leadership hiring, even mid-level hiring and entry-level hiring, and even campus recruitments. So that's the quick, long and short of CareerNet.
You didn't say the best thing. You told me earlier that you're in the top 1% of Indian consulting companies.
In India, recruitment is a very fragmented market. Yeah. And when we started out in 99, there were about close to 8,000 firms. Today also there are 10,000 firms. Today, I think by the sheer size, we will be the largest in India, and probably by revenues, we'll be among the top 3 in India.
So congratulations on that achievement. Yep. That's really remarkable.
Thank you.
And we're all the more impressed that you've been able to find time to come and talk to us at Riabu. One of the things we wanted to talk about is how you see the market at the moment and some of the challenges that you're experiencing. Sure. First of all, in terms of growth in India and the vibrancy of the overall market.
So, the best thing about India is that at the macro level, you always find India to be very exciting because we have such a large population, supply underserved, demand all-time high, rising aspirations. But the challenges lies at the micro level when you really get into thick and thin of the things. That is where you start realizing that what are the problems you need to go and solve that. At a macro level, we are a very exciting country.
And one of the problems that many companies experience, and I'm not just talking about India here, is the problem of having enough cash to run the business, particularly in getting paid on time.
No, you are right. So definitely liquidity and cash is really one of the key challenges today in the Indian economy. While there is a lot of easing which is happening at the government side, but still, as I said, at the macro level, the country is too good. At the micro level is where you face the problem. And especially in our space, where the average payment cycles have been anywhere between about 30 to 60 days on paper, but the practice norm is far more higher.
Well, that would put you above the overall market, because the Ministry of Corporate Affairs in India has given us data to say that the level of payment from customers has slowed for the 3rd year in succession, and it averages at about 45. I think what you're saying is that your industry is significantly
higher because definitely government will be collecting data across various sectors, not only various other service providers also. But if they particularly talk about recruitment, I think the payment cycles on average will be between 60 to 90 days. We on average budget about 90 days as a cash flow cycle for us. We have got about 50% customers who pay us within the 60 days, but another 50% customers who take about anywhere from 120 to even 180 days also to pay.
Quite a challenge to run a business of any size if it takes you 3 to 4 months to get paid by your customers.
I agree, and especially recruitment is a non-equity backed business, which is a very cash flow backed business. Mm-hmm. And especially in India, equity is not a very big place still. It's a very recent phenomenon of the internet economy. Most of the businesses in India run on cash flows, and for any cash flow business, if payment cycles are longer, then you do it at the cost of the growth. So, which is really the problem area.
Do you feel that you might lose customers if you press them hard to pay you?
Yeah, very much. You can't really be arrogant with them. In fact, last evening from Singapore, I called up one of my customers who has not paid me for 9 months, and the only thing was empathy. The only thing was pleading. The only thing was...
You think your customer has cash flow issues?
Yeah, they have cash flow issues also.
Mm-hmm.
They have
very interesting.
So it's a whole chain which is linked. There are a lot of customers who have very great trust, who have been paying on time, but because of the whole liquidity situation, they will also delay, and you can't really do too much because they have been good to you, and now suddenly you can't say that I'll take you to court or I'll send you a notice. It doesn't work in India like that.
That's very interesting. Well, one of the things I want to come on to in a minute is the fact that many SMEs in India and larger companies are having to borrow to run the business, partly because they don't get paid on time. But before we get to that, there's another area that I want to touch on, and that's this. In India, you have to pay GST as soon as you deliver a good or service, irrespective of when the customer pays you.
Yes, yes. See, in case of goods, it is far more easier because goods sold once can't be returned.
Yeah.
Kind of a thing, and rarely the return rate is only 0.1% or 0.2%. So you for sure know that the payment is going to happen and that it has been done. But in case of services, when the services has been delivered, there is a very subjectivity issue which is there. There's always that 15-20% risk of the service not being acknowledged, service being cancelled. In our business, candidates joining and leaving kind of a thing. There is a very messy process of because we pay GST the moment we raise the invoice, and the payment is going to come for 180 days, which means that technically for $100 of service delivered, I am first paying $18 from my pocket with the hope that I will get 18 back.
So the classic problem of working capital is that I have to fork out the money to run my business before my customers pay me. I've got to pay for premises,
Absolutely.
staff salaries, and so on. In India, in addition, you actually have to pay GST on work that you've delivered, irrespective of when your customer
Yes,
pays you.
and Simon, if you consider any business which is a healthy business in India, because businesses are growing faster, a 20% profitable business, which means that for earning 100 rupees, you're spending 80 rupees. You're spending all 80, and next 4 months you are going to get money, which means that 80 into 4, 320 plus the 18 rupees of tax, which is under 72.
This must put immense pressure on companies. I mean,
Yes.
you've got a healthy rate of growth and a healthy balance sheet, I understand.
Yes.
But there'll be many companies that are finding it harder.
Yeah, even for us who are growing 30% to 40% year on year and a reasonable bottom line, we ourselves are struggling big time to kind of ensure that we are able to because we pay off our bills on time.
Do SMEs, in your experience, have to borrow money in order to keep the business going?
See, MSMEs, most of them have to borrow. There is definitely no two ways about it, and the interest rates are fairly expensive. Certain easing have been done by the government in terms of the MSME Payment Act, which has come in which you have to pay on time.
Is it worth defining an MSME as a company that has a paid-up capital of about $1 million Sing dollars?
Paid up capital about $1 million.
Okay, good. Yeah.
So, and which essentially would ensure that 99% of our recruitment fraternity gets covered. But still, and by the law, most of them all the customers have to pay. In fact, everyone have to pay on time. And especially the large MNCs who are very much there, which are very compliance driven, they tend to follow that. But if a customer itself has a cash flow issue, what can you do? Many times we get a phone call and say that, look, while your service has been delivered, but please raise the invoice after 90 days.
This is very interesting because there are a number of countries that are looking at SMEs and worrying that SMEs provide most employment in most countries in Asia, are worrying that it's taking longer and longer for SMEs to be paid, particularly by large corporates, and they're instituting rules and regulations. Australia's done it, the UK's in fact doing it. We talked about that a little bit, and your view was that although the government has actually instituted regulations to say when your customers have to pay you, it's not always practical for you to.
Yes, and I think, the current government has been very supportive in terms of ensuring that how the ease of business can be done and the payments can be made there. But, at the end, as I said, if my customer calls me up and says that raise the invoice after 60 days, then technically 60 plus 45 days.
105 days,
105 days.
Assuming the money reaches your bank.
Yes, and my customer is compliant also, but at the end of it, I have to do it.
So at the end of the day, a customer pays you in 105 days. It's a customer that you like and you want to keep.
Yeah.
But for 105 days, you've had to run your business, pay your salaries, and you paid the GST on that transaction months ago.
For the 45 days we have to pay. And, in a services environment, you can always define that where the service ends. As per the law, the government says that invoicing has to be when the service ends. But there is no very technical definition of when the service ends. You could always attach a small feedback survey from a formality point of view after 3 months of joining and say that now the service ends.
This is Simon Littlewood with Riabu. We're very pleased to have with us Mr. Anshuman, who is CEO of KoreaNet from Bengaluru. And we're talking about the economic climate in India, the problem of getting paid on time, and the fact that in many cases, companies have to borrow significant amounts of money to keep their balance sheet afloat. So if I want to borrow money to make sure that I can keep the lights on because my customers haven't paid me on time, who do I borrow it from and what rate of interest am I typically going to pay?
One thing is obviously your own bank through whom you are banking. They essentially provide you overdraft. And that overdraft is basis how much of your billings is left, and basis that 80% of that they are able to provide an overdraft.
Okay.
And which is not very complex, but that is not sufficient enough.
What sort of rate of interest would they be?
Typically anywhere from about 15% to 18%, depending on how well you negotiate with them.
Okay.
And if you want to go and do unsecured lending outside in the market, then God save you, it is anywhere from 20% going to about 25%.
This is expensive, compared to
Quite.
many markets.
Compared to many markets, it is very expensive. See, 20% when you raise debt is not easy to service also. We have an investment in one of our company which is not so super profitable, and they have raised debt, and most of their profit is going in servicing debt.
Yes, well, that's one of the problems if you have interest rates as high as that. And I think one of the reasons that this interests us is because if we look here in Singapore, overall corporate debt's gone up by more than 50% in the last decade in Singapore, and many SMEs have been borrowing more and more money, and many SMEs have that borrowing secured against the assets of the owners of the company. So there are a lot of companies in Singapore, 70 to 80% of SMEs that borrow money. The owner's house or his mum's house is at risk.
Same is our case.
Okay, so personal guarantees
That's why I
are
said,
typically required in India
the
as well.
OD money is not sufficient enough, so how do you borrow? As the owners, and we have whatever assets we have, they are mortgaged to ensure that we are able to ease out the debt.
Do you think that the penalties that the Ministry of Corporate Affairs has now instituted are really going to help?
See, they are going to help. There is definitely overall penalties which they are trying to put for delayed payments and those kind of a thing. There have been cases where some of our very good customers paid in 60 days and they called up and they paid us the interest for the 15 days on their own to be compliant.
Okay.
And it was a very sea change, and what triggers them is essentially the new government regulation which is there.
So the government regulation provides that if companies pay late, they have to pay interest?
Yes.
Okay.
After 45 days you can't hold.
Have you added that to your terms?
Well, you know, you can't do that so much in India. You can't really go back. Customers don't feel good about it.
Particularly if they've been doing business with you
particularly they've been doing business
for a while.
See, while India is a very law-abiding country, but let me tell you very clearly, it is the trust which works more versus the piece of paper.
I think most people who run businesses,
Yeah.
you know,
So it is the trust factor which has
would
to
say
be,
it's the trust factor.
Trust factor. You have to take that leap of faith and work.
The problem is if the trust factor leads you to a point where you actually run out of money and you can't run your business anymore, this is a bit of a challenge.
That's definitely becoming a situation. That's
Okay.
definitely a situation which we are hurting, because if at the end, you know, you need to pay the bills on time. Okay, so if you don't pay your employees on time, you can't keep your employee morale happy.
If we look at you know, yours is a very large, KoreaNet is a very large specialist consulting business working mainly within the technology sector. Are there different geographies or different segments of your market which pay better than others, or?
See, in India, if you see, there are like 3-4 kinds of customers which are primarily, 3-4 kinds of companies are there. One are very promoter-driven companies. The other are conglomerates which are there. Then the third is the whole venture capital-backed startups which are there. And the fourth is the global multinationals of US and Europe who have come in India.
Mm-hmm.
I think the segment number 4, which is the global multinationals, are mostly very compliant. Because they have very clear industry practices, and I think there is a very clear-cut directive from the.
So they tend to pay
they
earlier
have to be,
than
yes,
Indian
because
companies.
you know it is not anybody's money. Okay,
That's interesting.
And if the payment is not made on time and the penalty is paid, then the headquarters will ask you a question that why the penalty was paid, why were you not law compliant. So that essentially definitely ensures that they are compliant. And then obviously followed by conglomerates. Some of them are very clean, some of them are not so clean. Um, Promoter driven businesses is obviously always a tough game, and that's a place where you have to really build it on trust and relationship. And fortunately, unfortunately, in India, still a majority of the businesses are promoter driven.
If I mean, I guess it would be a good thing if companies were able to borrow money somewhat more cheaply than 15 or 18 or 20
Certainly,
or 30%.
certainly.
Okay, that's very interesting. Do you see a deterioration in the situation for SMEs? Is it more or less the same, or is it getting worse?
Certain areas we have been benefited. For example, this 45 days clause has at least ensured that there is some lever in the hand. And but for example, GST thing in longer run will be good. In shorter run, it is definitely a problem area because we are now paying the whole GST the day a invoice is raised. So while the input of that which my customer takes is still not very transparent, part one has become transparent. The part two, the government has to yet kind of make it more digitally enabled, which is going to take time. Once that happens, then I do believe that, so we see that there is some light at the end of the tunnel, but we do not see the light for the lower interest rates right now.
Okay.
So
I mean, there's a practical issue here, which is that presumably some of your customers aren't able to pay you because they don't have the money, irrespective of what the law says.
see, the fact is if my customer does not have a money, then how will they pay?
Yeah.
I think the bottom line is that.
So penalties don't help.
But see, what can you do? They will call me up and say that cancel the invoice and raise the invoice again. So that on paper I look good.
Yes.
I have no other choice but to go to the GST portal and cancel my invoice and re-raise it.
That's pretty common, you know.
Pretty
in
common,
many
common.
countries across many
Pretty
industries.
common, and you know, because they have to be compliant.
It's this is absolutely fascinating, Anshuman. If we focus in again on your industry, the recruitment industry, your company CareerNet is in the top 1% of Indian recruitment companies. You specialize in technology. The MD of Antal India, Joseph Devasia, do you know him?
I've heard, yeah.
He says recruitment businesses are facing severe cash flow issues, and that whereas clients would usually pay within 30 to 45, this is now 100 days. He thinks that your industry has been affected actually worse than many other industries. Do you think that's true?
So, you know, I would say certainly, and in recruitment also, if you further go more micro, then there are players who do lot of temping, who do the staffing services kind of a thing. They are definitely very badly affected.
Okay.
Because in case of staffing, the margins are very low.
Yes.
The margins are as low as about 3 to 4%.
The fees are much lower. The
Fees are much lower because in one-time hiring, the fees are still better. You can still run with a 20% margin, so you are not like struggling day in, day out. But places where you are in staffing business, where the margins are 2-3%, I think paying the 18% GST from the pocket upfront is just a killer.
No, I mean, because that's close to your total gross margin.
Yes, no, it is in fact much more than that.
And add in your operating
costs. And
costs.
one customer defaults, your all top line, your all complete profit is wiped out.
Okay.
So, so clearly, I think for businesses which are running on very low cash flows, on very low margins, they are having a very tough time. So basic thing is if you have any businesses which are below 25% margin, you have a problem of cash flows.
What would your advice be to those small guys?
See, I think, you know, two things they should clearly do. One is obviously negotiate well with your customers and work with your customers much more closely. Ensure that you lay out very clear-cut terms. For guys who have very low margins, you sign up contracts which are collect and pay versus pay and collect model kind of a thing. So with that, you are able to at least ensure that you take 0.5% less margin, but you are at least secured from those point of view, because when the cash flow problem hits, then it really is a mess around it.
What about upfront payments?
See, upfront payments again do not work in India. Do not, because see, I think the trust factor, as I said, India has still not got very organized from the service provider point of view. Once you have a very organized way of doing it, you know that these are the 10 big players which are there, and this player is not going to go away, and I have to work with them. Companies are fairly okay to pay upfront monies from that point of view. For a lot of the CXO hiring, upfront money is being paid. We have a division which does CXO hiring in our company. There we do get paid upfront kind of a thing. There are businesses where we do not, we get paid very late. So that is how we manage. We have a portfolio, and being a large player, we are able to run that portfolio.
That's very interesting. Let me ask you this, because you're here in Singapore. Do you have an international business? Are you expanding?
We are expanding. We are definitely looking to expand in the Southeast Asian markets because I think the overall economy in Southeast Asia is going digital in a big way, and we believe it's a very interesting time to kind of work with a lot of the South Asian companies.
Any possibilities of an IPO? Do you want to tell us about that?
Not still at the horizon. We still need to kind of work through.
You will tell us, won't you?
Yeah. We will certainly keep you posted. Any day.
Anshuman Das, it's extremely kind of you to come. This is absolutely fascinating. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Simon. Pleasure to have you.